as a partner to NATO. We are now more than 500 days into a horrible war that Russia unleashed against its peaceful neighbor, Ukraine. More than 500 days of suffering for the Ukrainian people, but also more than 500 days of impressive resilience, courage, and bravery of the Ukrainian people. And we are also here to show very clearly and send a message that the European Union stands by Ukraine. We have supported Ukraine in the last 16 months while this war is raging intensively, be it financially, by mobilizing 70 billion euros financial support. We give shelter to 4 million Ukrainians, and we have delivered military equipment in an unprecedented manner into an active war zone. Just this week, the European Union has adopted a bill to scale up the production of ammunition, very much needed. The goal is to have 1 million rounds, to produce 1 million rounds within the next 12 months. We have one important contribution also to make for Ukraine's wish, not only to be a member of the European Union, but also to join NATO. Indispensable for that are reforms, strengthening of the institutions, and the fight, for example, against corruption. And here the European Commission is intensively working together with Ukraine to do these reforms. It is amazing to see the speed at which Ukraine is reforming despite this war. One thing is clear, this horrible war changes Europe's face forever. We see Finland joining NATO, Sweden joining NATO. Congratulations again to Sweden for this success. And we see also that everybody has understood that this is more than the war that Russia unleashed against Ukraine. It is about the question who we are and what the rules are globally. We do never want to accept that might makes right. We are determined to defend the international law, the UN Charter, and this is what unites us here in Vilnius.
Commission President, are delays to EU and NATO membership doing what Volodymyr Zelensky says, giving motivation to Russia to continue its terror? Should we not actually give accelerated timeframes for both NATO membership and indeed EU membership?
The speed at which Ukraine is advancing in the EU membership, and that's the only one I can speak about as Commission President, is amazing. It's impressive. It is a merits-based process, and we see the enthusiasm and the intensity with which Ukraine is reforming and thus advancing rapidly towards EU membership. So I'm very confident that if they keep on going, keeping this speed, that success will be there soon. And it is an impressive example to show that you can move forward fast in EU membership if you fulfill the necessary conditions. Thank you. Wichtig ist, dass wir robuste Sicherheitsgarantien geben. Und hier kann ein Beitrag der Europäischen Union eine Vorbedingung für einen Beitritt zur NATO auch sein, dass wir arbeiten ganz intensiv mit der Ukraine an den notwendigen Reformen, die unverzichtbar sind, an den Reformen zum Beispiel, um Korruption zu bekämpfen oder um die Institutionen zu stärken. Und dieses ist eine sehr intensive Arbeit, die die Europäische Kommission gemeinsam mit der Ukraine macht, schon seit Monaten. Es ist beeindruckend zu sehen, das Tempo, mit dem die Ukraine reformiert, während sie einen Abwehrkampf gegen Russland führt. Und diese Grundvoraussetzung der Reformen gelten sowohl für den Beitritt zur Europäischen Union als auch zur NATO. Hier können wir intensiv unterstützen. Ein zweites, wo wir auch intensiv unterstützen können, ist die Produktion von militärischer Ausrüstung, zum Beispiel Munition, die dringend gebraucht wird. Wir haben jetzt gerade ein Gesetz dazu verabschiedet, das die industrielle Basis stärkt zur Produktion zur Munition, nicht nur für die eigenen Bestände, sondern insbesondere, um der Ukraine auch zu helfen. Das sind zwei ganz verschiedene Themen. Das eine ist die NATO. Das müssen andere beantworten. Bei der Europäischen Union ist das ein zweiter Prozess. Insofern können diese beiden Prozesse nicht miteinander vermengt werden. Danke. There is a very clear and dedicated plan for de-escalation, a roadmap. Both parties worked on earlier this year, and we call on both parties to de-escalate and to follow up this roadmap. This is absolutely vital to move forward in a peaceful manner, and it is clear that both parties have to deliver on what has been agreed in Ohrid. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to be here for second day of this NATO summit. Obviously, looking forward to listen to President Zelensky. Always good when he's present among us, and I think from a symbolic point of view, it is incredibly important to have him here at this NATO summit here in the Baltics. We also see that the Ukrainian flag here, it is a symbol for much more than Ukraine. It is a symbol for freedom, for democracy, and we're really looking forward to listen to him. Looking forward also to announcements that will be made potentially on security guarantees. Looking forward to what the G7 countries are going to say about that. We know that besides the discussion on an invitation of Ukraine joining NATO at one point, the short-term security guarantees obviously are what is important and what will help them to win the war eventually. Yes. No, not at all. I think this summit, from a symbolic point of view, is incredibly important. For him to be present here at the NATO summit, if we would have said that 2 years ago, no one would have believed that. As I said, I think the invitation on being part of NATO and being part of NATO, it's clear that Ukraine at some point will be part of NATO. It's a very important message to be given. The security guarantees on the short term is really what it is all about. It's those security guarantees that will help Ukraine to win the war. And winning the war, well, that's the main element for Ukraine to obtain the final security guarantee, and that's being part of NATO.
What are the conditions Ukraine does not keep right now, other than?
Well, yeah, that's the main one. And I think everyone understands that ending the war is the main element. And you don't have to underestimate that all of our countries are doing a very delicate balancing act of supporting and full-on supporting a country that is at war with Russia. But we ourselves do not want to be at war with Russia ourselves. It would not be to the benefit of anyone. We have to stay outside of this war, but be able to support Ukraine. We managed that balancing, that very delicate balancing act for the last 17 months. It's to the benefit of everyone that we maintain that balancing act. Of course, and that's totally logical. I mean, NATO is a security alliance where we pool our military resources. One of the basic conditions, of course, is that there is enough democratic oversight on the usage of military force. That's the basis of a military alliance. And making sure that everyone is in line with that and respects those conditions, that's the basic element of NATO. And I'm quite sure that Ukraine will be able to comply with those guarantees. but making sure that they are, I think it's a legitimate condition. Sorry, can you repeat? Well, I think that what we've been doing over the last months is a lot of military supplies, a lot of things on the short term. I think now it's evolving more into military programs which are multi-year, which also have an industrial dimension, and which could be something where other countries could join. We're looking forward to what the G7 countries might present today. And from a Belgian perspective, and I know that a lot of my colleagues look at it that way as well, this is something that we will investigate and see in which way we could cooperate in that as well. But the more structural, long-term perspective of a military program is definitely a step forward related to the military deliveries that we have done up to now. What is different this time is, and it's really in the wording of everything that we've communicated yesterday, is that we talk about these security guarantees. That is something we do in the meantime until Ukraine becomes member of NATO. So we're very clear on the fact that at some point Ukraine will be part of NATO. And in the meantime, we will do everything to give them the security guarantees that can end the war. And ending the war will give them the ultimate security guarantee, that's being part of NATO. All right, thank you.
Good morning to everyone. I think that yesterday's meeting was an excellent meeting. We went into the room united, and we came out of the room united. And if in one word I could say how I feel it, that NATO is becoming even stronger. First of all, with the accession of Finland, and we know that Sweden will also be joining NATO, this will make the Baltic Sea region much, much more secure. The Baltic Sea will now effectively become the NATO Sea, and that has incredibly positive ramifications for Baltic state security, which is, of course, very important to Latvia. Then if we look at the further decisions that were made in strengthening the entire eastern flank, this is a very clear signal also to Moscow that the more Moscow pushes and wages war in Ukraine, the stronger and more resolute the response from NATO becomes. So Russia wages war, NATO responds. Already 2 new members. Russia wages more war, NATO will respond even more strongly. And of course, we discussed Ukraine, and it is significant to note that among NATO partners, there is a unanimous view that we need and we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes until they win this war. And this is also a very clear signal to Moscow that Moscow is not creating disunity in NATO in arguments. Moscow is hardening the resolution of leaders to say we will have to continue and we will continue. Not contingent upon the success of today's battles, if it's going well or not so well, we will continue to support at any rate. And it's also clear that the path for Ukraine will be in NATO. It's like an inevitability which is built into the system. And yesterday evening, we met with President Zelensky. We'll be meeting with him today in the first NATO-Ukraine Council, which is actually a very significant change. And the discussions were very amicable. It was a very friendly discussion around the dinner table. And actually, it was so friendly, we ended up staying quite late, later than probably most of us thought. So a very good feeling coming into the meetings today. We have a very important meeting with our democratic allies, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. It's important that we build on these partnerships. And of course, looking forward to the first NATO-Ukraine Council. We are moving forward. Thank you very much. I'll answer the question how, from my point of view. So as a Latvian Prime Minister, I would want some things maybe to move a little faster. It's not surprising. Some want to move faster, some are maybe more hesitant. So there will always be a difference of flavor, of how fast you would want to go. But when you look at the end of it, what everyone gets, including Ukraine, and what Moscow sees, is we are all very united. The push and the effort is 100% behind Ukraine. Ukraine is getting more concrete pledges. We saw the pledge yesterday from President Macron with the longer-range missiles. The assistance is there, and the assistance will remain there. And the direction is also very clear. The direction is NATO, and everyone understands that. See, NATO is very strong in the skies today. Yeah, the defense plans that were adopted yesterday, as a politician, I maybe don't understand all the intricacies, but I'm clever enough to listen to what all the generals are saying. And all the generals are saying that this was an absolutely prerequisite to make sure that all of the contingencies are taken care of, all the chains of command are worked out in finer detail, and the plans are adapting to the new reality. So this means that in terms of any conflict now, everyone knows what their place is and how they fit into the big decision. This is important for logistics, this is important for reinforcements, for all of these things. Not to say that there were no plans beforehand, but now it's much, much more concrete. And for the Baltic countries, the Suwałki Gap, which has been the Achilles heel in terms of resupplies, etc., with Sweden and Finland joining, this is no longer so geographically or militarily important, because supply routes can be provided over the Baltic Sea. The distance between Gotland and Western Latvia is not very far at all. And with aerial defenses, etc., supply chains can be created over the Baltic Sea. So it changes the game actually completely in favor of Baltic state security. It's a process. It's a process, and NATO has its own procedures, and it can be maybe a little frustrating at times, but there are certain procedures. And I guess they make sense. Also, when my country joined NATO, there were reforms and chains of command and information, etc., that needed to be addressed before. So all of the same rules apply to everyone, but trust is something which builds. And I think with Zelensky coming today and also the council meeting, I think that level of trust and mutual understanding will only grow. Many of us leaders know Zelensky quite well. We've met him on various occasions in Kiev and outside. Now that everyone will be meeting him, even if someone has not yet, that will help to build that. And Zelensky's personal contacts with everyone is extremely important for his country. But he knows that within NATO, there is a block of us who are absolutely 100% behind and supportive, and will continue that effort. So the process is moving forward. I'm confident that things will work out very well.
Prime Minister, was there a talk about Belarus yesterday, as President Macron said?
Yeah, again, I think I've stated this before, that Belarus, in everyone's understanding, is essentially an extension of Russia today. To speak of an independent Belarus is something to be attained sometime in the future, but Belarus has effectively lost any sovereignty. So when we look at the entire situation, the military situation, the sanction situation, everyone views Belarus as an extended part of Russia for all practical purposes.
Just a quick follow-up on the security guarantee. Why do you think they will work this time? Because in the past, Ukraine had the Budapest memorandum, but that maybe didn't work.
It's a process. NATO is a military bloc, but it is also a political bloc. And politics sometimes can seem frustratingly slow on a Monday to Tuesday basis. But if we look at the trajectory of where we have gone in the past 500 days, we have gone from member states being hesitant of supporting Ukraine, of this, of that, to now 100% backing, and also a clear backing for the direction of coming into NATO. This is a big change. We've had countries which were not investing in defense, which are now investing in their defense. We're looking at increasing the defense industry in Europe, its capacity, and around NATO to do this. So it is all a process. And as someone who's in the process, I very well understand that it sometimes seems quite slow. But actually, in the bigger scheme of things, it's not so slow. And what's important that in politics and in these processes, you build in the inevitability. And the machine is moving. And Putin understands that very well. Thank you very much.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Wszystkie punkty były bardzo ważne i trudno mówić o tym, co było najważniejsze z naszego punktu widzenia. Pamiętajmy, że wczoraj dyskutowaliśmy w głównej mierze o tych kwestiach, które dotyczą bezpośrednio właściwie bezpieczeństwa Polski. W związku z powyższym oczywiście to była mowa o całej rozległości, zwłaszcza wschodniej flanki NATO, ale jednak na tej wschodniej flance NATO największym partnerem jest Polska. W związku z powyższym wszystkie te kwestie były bardzo istotne, o których wczoraj dyskutowaliśmy, aczkolwiek oczywiście zagadnienie przyszłości Ukrainy, jeżeli chodzi o jej członkostwo w NATO, tutaj było tym tematem takim najbardziej powiedzmy żywym w sensie politycznym, prawda? Więc na pewno ten element i kwestia zaproszenia. Do ostatniej chwili trwały jeszcze dyskusje i ustalenia co do treści ostatecznej deklaracji, która wczoraj została przyjęta. No niemniej jednak taka wyraźna, po pierwsze, zapowiedź przyjęcia Ukrainy do NATO jest. Przyjęcie, że Ukraina będzie zwolniona z Membership Action Plan, to jest bardzo ważne. No i po trzecie, że przekształcamy Komitet NATO-Ukraina, Komisję NATO-Ukraina w Radę NATO-Ukraina, to też jest bardzo ważny element decyzji. No i całe przyjęcie planu pomocy dla Ukrainy też ma tutaj ogromne znaczenie. Więc tych elementów, o których wczoraj dyskutowaliśmy, jest dużo i to jest cały taki, można powiedzieć, ciąg działań, które zmierzają do wzmocnienia wschodniej flanki NATO. Z naszego punktu widzenia takim niebagatelnym wzmocnieniem z całą pewnością byłoby przyjęcie Ukrainy do NATO. Co do tego nie mamy żadnych wątpliwości. To jest jednak ten bufor, który oddziela nas od dzisiaj z całą pewnością największego zagrożenia, jakie stanowi Rosja. No to widać nawet gołym okiem. NATO mówiło o tym już od kilku lat, ale dzisiaj jesteśmy rzeczywiście, stoimy wobec faktu rosyjskiej agresji na Ukrainie i widać było, że to nie były tylko słowa. to rosyjskie zagrożenie, tylko ono jest faktyczne. I w związku z powyższym przyjęcie jeszcze jednego wielkiego, ogromnego, można powiedzieć, państwa europejskiego. Pamiętajmy o tym, że terytorialnie Ukraina jest 2 razy większa od Polski. Do NATO z tak wielkim zasobem naturalnym z jednej strony, ale z drugiej strony z dużą czy wielką wręcz armią, no, dzisiaj ogromnie doświadczoną bojowo, no, z całą pewnością w przyszłości dla NATO będzie ogromnym wzmocnieniem. Więc a tym samym także i dla nas. No dzisiaj to my jesteśmy tą flanką NATO. Jeżeli Ukraina, mam nadzieję, zostanie przyjęta do NATO, to ta flanka przynajmniej w części znacząco rozciągnie się na wschód.
Panie prezydencie, zwoła pan Radę Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego po powrocie do Polski?
Tak, będę chciał, tak jak zazwyczaj to robiłem po szczycie NATO, zaprosić stałych, że tak powiem, uczestników na Radę Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego po to, by zrelacjonować, także po to, by wysłuchać głosów co do sytuacji. Pamiętajmy, że Rada Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego, jak stanowi konstytucja, jest takim ciałem doradczym prezydenta, więc wysłuchanie tego, co państwo, co koleżanki i koledzy z całego spektrum sceny politycznej w Polsce mają do powiedzenia na temat aktualnej sytuacji bezpieczeństwa Rzeczypospolitej, także w kontekście tego, co ja im przekażę tutaj ze szczytu NATO, z jego atmosfery, z jego postanowień, z rozmów kuluarowych, które tutaj są toczone, no jest według mnie istotne dla budowania takiej jedności polskiej sceny politycznej w kwestii, która, nie mam żadnych wątpliwości, dla naszych rodaków jest najważniejsza, a mianowicie bezpieczeństwa naszego, zarówno tego wewnętrznego, jak i zewnętrznego, więc tak, oczywiście mam nadzieję, że to posiedzenie Rady Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego odbędzie się i to jak najszybciej. Proszę Państwa, no, rozmowy z panem premierem Rishim Sunakiem sprowadzają się do bieżącej współpracy w tej chwili między Wielką Brytanią a Polską. No, jesteśmy dzisiaj na szczycie NATO, więc przede wszystkim dyskutowaliśmy o kwestiach wspólnych programów zbrojeniowych. Pamiętajmy NAREW, Miecznik, plany na przyszłość. To były te zasadnicze kwestie, o których mówiliśmy wczoraj z panem premierem. Ta współpraca układa się bardzo dobrze. Rozmawialiśmy oczywiście także i o kwestii przyszłego członkostwa Ukrainy w NATO i o tym, w jaki sposób wspomagamy Ukrainę. Też pamiętajcie Państwo, że zarówno Wielka Brytania, jak i Polska są absolutnie w awangardzie donatorów Ukrainy. To my mówię w sensie zarówno Brytyjczycy, jak i my Polacy przekazaliśmy jak do tej pory na Ukrainę, oczywiście po Stanach Zjednoczonych, najwięcej sprzętu i ta pomoc z naszej strony jest największa, więc także i o tych kwestiach rozmawialiśmy.
Panie prezydencie, czy była wczoraj dyskusja o Białorusi, tak jak pan się spodziewał tego?
Poruszyliśmy ten temat. Jakiejś długiej dyskusji w tej kwestii wczoraj nie było. Zobaczymy dzisiaj. Pamiętajmy, że mamy gości na dzisiejszej sesji, która jest podzielona na 2 części. W pierwszej części mamy kraje z Dalekiego Wschodu, mamy kraje obszaru azjatycko-pacyficznego, czyli Nową Zelandię, czyli Australię, Japonię, Koreę Południową. I będziemy na pewno dyskutowali o tych kwestiach, które dotyczą tej części świata i w związku z tym bezpieczeństwa również i całego świata, bo wszyscy przecież znakomicie wiedzą, że to przede wszystkim dotyczy relacji z Chinami, prawda? I sytuacji, która tam potencjalnie może się rozwinąć. No ale to jest tak, że to tak zwane globalne południe, czyli Afryka i wpływy zarówno rosyjskie, jak i chińskie w Afryce, więc na pewno te tematy będą dyskutowane, ale z drugiej strony ta druga część to jest właśnie spotkanie z Ukrainą i w tym kontekście dokładnie właśnie wschodniej flanki, przyszłości Ukrainy, zagrożeń dla Ukrainy. No, pamiętajmy, że jednym z tych hipotetycznych zagrożeń w tej chwili jest także i potencjalna obecność najemników z grupy Wagnera na Białorusi, którzy, no kto wie, być może mają służyć temu, by stwarzać kolejne zagrożenie właśnie dla Ukrainy od północy. In my opinion, it's absolutely not enough. I hope that in a few years, Ukraine will be the full member of our alliance, of NATO.
Why was it not possible to give a clear pathway to Ukraine's membership now?
You know, I think that this path is clear now after all this decision we made yesterday. So we can say that the decision is made. Oh, the timetable is, you know, it's very difficult and it's practically impossible, taking into account that we need unity to make the decision, yes, in NATO, to talk about the full membership of Ukraine now, that we can decide that Ukraine will be the member of NATO, I don't know, tomorrow, yes, because there is war. During the war, it's impossible. Taking into account the Article 5 of NATO and collective defense. We would like to discuss this issue with G7 countries because this is really important element of the future cooperation and support for Ukraine. We will talk about it, I hope. Thank you very much. Dziękuję bardzo.
Good morning, everyone. This is an important meeting. It's extremely important to stick together to support Ukraine as much as we can. We have, together with NATO, the EU, an excellent cooperation, and we are working a lot in order for the EU to become more and more a security provider in full coordination with NATO. It's also very important to make very clear that we want to be extremely united and that we are ready to provide security guarantees to Ukraine and to participate in all the efforts. We also support the Just Peace formula proposed by Volodymyr Zelensky, based on the UN Charter, based on justice. There is no place for impunity. L'Union européenne et l'OTAN, nous sommes extrêmement unis dans ces temps extrêmement difficiles pour soutenir l'Ukraine autant qu'il est possible. L'Union européenne soutient l'Ukraine avec des moyens financiers, avec des moyens humanitaires, avec des moyens politiques. C'est la reconnaissance du statut de candidat pour l'Ukraine et avec des moyens militaires, la facilité paix, la formation des militaires ukrainiens sont autant d'exemples de la détermination de l'Union européenne de travailler en complémentarité étroite avec l'OTAN pour faire en sorte que l'on défende les mêmes valeurs, que l'on défende la Charte des Nations Unies et la souveraineté. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. So, we will continue today. I think the experience we got yesterday, I'm in Finland, being first time full member, that was a very positive meeting. And we are expecting, like we yesterday were talking, to have our good neighbor Sweden alongside us as soon as possible. Today, we have a possibility of meeting President Zelensky, and I guess that will be a very interesting, profound discussion. Tapasin hänet eilen illalla myöhemmin ja varmasti odotukset niin hänellä kuin Ukrainassa yleensä ovat olleet tietysti suuriakin ja sitä taustaa vasten ehkä tuo ensireaktio jollain tavalla on ymmärrettävä. Katsotaan nyt sitten tänään, mitä hän tänään sanoo. Tässähän on keskusteltu pitkin matkaa ja on ollut jonkin verran erilaisia näkemyksiä, niin kuin presidentti Duda on sitten kerrannut. Kuitenkin varmasti hänkin on pitänyt yhtenäistä mielipidettä, että sellainen kyetään rakentamaan hyvin tärkeänä. Minä olen todennut hyvin selvästi, että nyt tavoitteena pitäisi olla se, että kaikki tavoin edistetään ja avustetaan Ukrainaa tavoittamaan ne kriteerit, jotka NATO on asettanut. Tämä edistäminen ja tavoittaminen on tietysti toimintaa, joka antaa sitten mahdollisuuksia myöskin ehkä tietynlaiseen väljyyteen. Nyt tietysti tässä uudessa tilanteessa on erittäin tärkeää siinä mielessä, että Euroopassa, Ukrainassa on sotatila. On erittäin tärkeää, että NATO asettautuu tietyllä tavalla uuteen raamiin ja sitä näissä suunnitelmissa haetaan. Kyllä se on Suomelle tietysti erittäin tärkeää ja totta kai me olemme nyt sitten suunnitelmissa hyvin kiinteänä osana. Kyllä oikeastaan kaikki kokemukset nyt vuoden ajalta osoittavat, että kyllä siinä puhutaan minimitasosta. On vaan havahduttava siihen, että sellainen pysyvä rauhantila, johon me ehkä tuudittaudumme, ei se olekaan annettu asia.
Presidentti Niinistö, NATO ei voi antaa turvatakuita Ukrainalle sodan aikana, mutta G7-maat tulevat tänään ilmeisesti jonkinlaiset takuut antamaan. Miten tämä on mahdollista, että se voi antaa ja toinen ei?
Ymmärtääkseni G7-maat tulevat puhumaan sellaisilla otsakkeilla kuin security assurance, joka on vähän eri asia kuin guarantees. Hyvä, kiitoksia.
Good morning, everybody. And today we have a historic Ukraine NATO Council coming up. Yesterday we did render some decisions regarding the pathway of Ukraine to NATO. There was, of course, a frustration on the Ukrainian side. Understandably, Ukraine wants to have the peace that NATO's umbrella is bringing for our country, for example. But it is very important that all the allies are behind this decision and we go and start this process to take Ukraine into NATO. As I've said before, I really do believe that Ukraine's place is in NATO. Being in NATO is ending the grey zones that are sources of conflict and wars, what we want to achieve. Yesterday, for us, a very important decision regarding the new defense plans. These plans were adopted, and that means that we are really ready to defend our country from the first inch, from the first moment. And now it's also up to all the allies to increase the defense expenditure in order to really fill those plans with real substance. And I'm really glad that everybody agreed to the obligation of 2% of GDP in defense investment. Also joining, Sweden joining NATO is very good for the security of our region because now it's not the Suwalki gap that the Baltic countries' defense depends on, but the help can come from the other side as well, and this is making this whole region more secure. Today, we're going to discuss with 4 good partners, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea. This war has shown that the countries that have the same values that we have here will join and really support Ukraine every possible way. And we have other challenges. Security of ours is not regional but global. Cybersecurity issues, information war that is going on, and there's a lot that we all share. Thank you.
On Ukraine, you said there's some frustration, but what you have wished for, do you think Ukraine should join NATO even if the war going on?
As I said before, we were not saying that Ukraine should join while the war is going on. Nobody asked that. Nobody was demanding that, and never has. Even Ukraine hasn't. Everybody understands that they can't join while the war is going on. It is important that we agreed this process. I mean, the foreign ministers will nudge this process annually, seeing where it is going. Of course, a lot of words in the text. But what is important is that we can't draft Ukraine into NATO. We have to have concrete steps that take Ukraine into NATO. And we have those steps agreed so that we can fulfill all the conditions. And when the opportunity window opens, like it did for us, it might be a very short period of time when Ukraine has pushed Russia back to Russia and they have the opportunity to join NATO, then we should do it really fast because it's the only security guarantee, that it's the cheapest, and is actually deterring Russia from further aggression. We don't see that, but of course the question is, there's a lot of frustration that the war is going on and everybody wants to have peace, but what we are talking about is sustainable peace, and sustainable peace has few elements, and one of those is accountability, for example, whether the Russians are held accountable for the crimes committed, and there are other elements in the peace plan as well. So we can talk about peace then, and when there is peace, of course, we can also continue with the membership of NATO of Ukraine.
Those security guarantees that Ukraine is apparently getting, do you trust them, considering that they already had a Budapest memorandum?
In the Budapest memorandum, and there were security assurances, and Russia was also part of them, so they were not keeping their promises. Now it is the bilateral agreements that Ukraine has with different countries, so that we are giving them military aid to help them to defend themselves, and this is what we actually do. So writing this down gives them, assurance that when the change in leadership comes in some countries because we have elections, then it doesn't change the obligation of a country to support Ukraine. I think this is actually very important because the difference between Russia and democratic countries is that the Western countries keep their promises. And I think that is also very important regarding yesterday's decision, is that all the allies want to be behind those words, so that these are not only words but also deeds to take Ukraine into NATO. So that's why all the words were looked into so deeply and with so much detail. Well, as long as Lukashenko is leading the country, we have considered Belarus as a co-aggressor in this war because they have been acting together with Russia, and this is how we deal with them. Okay, thank you.
Добар ден на сите. Најпрво сакам да изразам големо задоволство од вчерашниот состанок, од првата сесија, на која што, како што и беше очекувано, се потврди единството во НАТО алијансата. При тоа сите го поздравивме влегувањето на Финска како 31-ва членка и чекорот кој што е направен пред финално влегување во алијансата на Шведска. Исто така беа донесени многу важни одлуки. Првата во однос на продолжувањето на поддршката на Украина, второ во однос на подготовката на безбедносни планови на регионално ниво, во однос на финансирањето, при што беше донесена одлука за 2% од бруто домашниот производ да биде минимум издвојување за одбраната, при што 20% најмалку да бидат за модернизација. И исто така голема одлука беше донесена и во однос на проширувањето на соработката на НАТО земјите во делот на сајбер безбедноста и во делот на хибридните закани кои што ги гледаме околу нас. Денес продолжуваме со две други сесии. Првата е со нашите партнери од Индо-Пацифичкиот регион. Тука со нас се присутни Австралија, Нов Зеланд, Јужна Кореја и Јапан, на кои што ќе ги споделиме најважните аспекти на заедничкото делување во однос на обезбедувањето на мирот во светот во овој нов геополитички момент. На состанокот ќе присуствуваат и председателката на Европската комисија и председателот на Европскиот совет, на кој што исто така ние представниците, председателите и премиерите на земјите од Западен Балкан ќе го реафирмираме и ставот за важноста на европските и евроатлантските интеграции за мирот, безбедноста, стабилноста и просперитетот на овој многу важен регион и за НАТО, меѓутоа и за Европската Унија. Ќе одржам и билатерална средба со премиерот на Грција и исто така ќе продолжи и втората сесија за денес, која што се однесува на првиот состанок на Советот НАТО Украина, на кој што ќе разговараме за подетално во однос на поддршката која што НАТО ја дава на Украина, меѓутоа и за чекорите кои што ќе бидат направени во иднина, се со цел поголемо приближување на Украина кон НАТО. Вчера бевте информирани од страна на генералниот секретар дека веќе е донесен нов план во однос на приближувањето на Украина. Она што беше пристапување во два чекори сега е во поедноставена процедура и дека наредните чекори и одлуки ќе зависат од консензусот и од одлуките, како и од ситуацијата на теренот која што ќе ја донесат земјите членки на НАТО. Ви благодарам.
So, it's a pleasure to see you all. I think the mood is good. And yesterday we took some very important decisions, and I think Vilnius can pretend to be the city where the historical NATO summit took place. Of course, I am looking forward for today's discussions, and it will be very interesting to hear Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. But I think in many regards, yesterday's meetings was impressive. We have Vilnius DAP, Vilnius Defense Investment Pledge, to present as a minimum instead of ceiling. Then we have Swedish membership of Sweden, which is a matter of very near future. And we have inaugural meeting of Finland. And of course, we have decision on Ukraine. And I think this is the first time we set very clear pathway for Ukraine towards NATO. We have very clear preconditions without map. We have Ukraine NATO Council, which will set institutional framework. And we have invitation when conditions will be met. So how we understand when conditions will be met? Does it mean the war is over or reforms implemented? For me, it's not the critical issue, because anyway, Ukraine has to do a lot in order to implement necessary reforms. And this is a path to European Union too. So they have to implement reforms anyway. And I don't want to try to guess when Ukraine will become a member of European and NATO. Maybe at the same time. Maybe they will become members of European Union sooner or later. This is not the critical issue. The most important issue for me is we have the decisions taken. We have Vilnius summit as a success story, and I am looking forward for few further discussions. Mes kalbėjome su juo vakar asmeniškai apie tai ir tikrai aš suprantu, Ukraina kovoja, Ukraina kariauja. Mes nekariaujame, mes remiame Ukrainą, bet mes nekariaujame. Todėl aš manau, kad turėtume susilaikyti nuo bet kokių vertinimų, nes tuos vertinimus daro prezidentas, kurio šalis kariauja už savo laisvę ir už mūsų visų laisvę. Mes tikrai kartais šiek tiek skirtingai skaitome tą patį tekstą. Aš dar kartą kartoju, kada sąlygos bus įvykdytos, galima suprasti ir kuomet susiklostys objektyvios aplinkybės, bet galima suprasti ir kad reikia padaryti tam tikrus namų darbus. Bet kaip ir minėjau angliškai presai, tai yra ne esminis klausimas, kadangi mes vis tiek kalbame apie reformų įgyvendinimą Ukrainoje. Jos privalo būti įgyvendinamos ir tai yra pirmiausia pačios Ukrainos interesas, kaip galima greičiau. Ir jie daro puikią pažangą. Jie įgyvendins reformų rekomendacijas, kurias teikia Europos komisija, ir labai tikiuosi, kad jau šių metų spalį gaus pakvietimą pradėti dėrybas dėl narystės Europos Sąjungoje. Taip kad, žinote, pasidžiaukime tuo, ką pasiekėme. Nes galėjo būti ir taip, kad sprendimas nebūtų buvęs pasiektas ir žinot, kas tuomet būtų labiausiai džiaugiasi tokiu NATO viršūnių susitikimo tokia baigtimi.
Prezidentė, atskiriant Ukrainos failą, kaip įvertintumėt pasiektus rezultatus samito Lietuvos atžvilgiu?
Aš manau, kad Lietuvai tai yra labai svarbus sprendimai dėl to, kad jie įtvirtina sveikinimą dėl platesnio ir gilesnio mūsų partnerių įsitraukimo dėl priešakinės gynybos čia. Ir manau, kad tas signalas arba tas sveikinimas, kad NATO sveikina valstybės skiriančias daugiau lėšų ir svarbiausia daugiau karinės galios priešakinio flango valstybėms, tai yra rytinio flango valstybėms, jisai mums leidžia justifikuoti tai, ką visiškai neseniai Vokietijos krašto apsaugos ministras Borisas Pistorius paskelbė ir ką vakar patvirtino savo pasisakymę Vokietijos kancleris Olafas Šolcas. Tai reiškia, kad mūsų su kancleriu Šolcu pasirašytas komunikatas galioja, jis yra įgyvendinamas ir jis bus įgyvendintas iki galo. Dabar mums reikia suskubti daryti savo darbus. This is the position of Ukraine, and probably you have to ask President Volodymyr Zelensky. I think that it was the maximum we could achieve yesterday, because nobody is talking about the membership right now. We are talking about the membership as conditions allow. I don't think so. It would be a wrong approach. I would never agree with such approach. And we should not talk about the peace negotiations until the territorial integrity of Ukraine is not restored. Thank you.
Agenda we have, I think, for today 3 priority questions. The first one is weapon packages, new weapon packages for supporting our army on the battlefield, and that is one. The second, I think, the invitation to NATO, and we want to be on the same page with everybody, with all the understanding. And for today, what we hear and understand that we'll have this invitation when security measures will allow. Yes, so I want to discuss with our partners all these things, and the sword will speak today and fight for this. Its security guarantees for Ukraine on the way to NATO. Thank you so much.